Hello, and a very warm welcome to this first full episode of Venom. Bearing in mind that the subject of poisons, venoms and toxins is vast, it's quite a challenge knowing where to begin. Nonetheless, we have to start somewhere, and probably the best place is to define what these terms actually mean, particularly because these words are often confused with each other when they actually have quite different and very specific meanings. So let's kick off by learning where these words come from and what they mean. Along the way, we will find out, what do poisons and thick country soups have in common? Why did offerings made to the goddess Venus possibly give us the word venom? And why does the word toxic have its roots in the practice of archery? To find out, please stay tuned to this episode of Venom. Let's start with poison. That's because it's probably the most common all-encompassing term used to refer to any harmful substance in the English language. The Collins Online Dictionary defines poison as a substance that harms or kills people or animals if they swallow it or absorb it. When used as a verb, the word to poison becomes the action of either giving or taking such a substance, with the recipient becoming ill or dying. One might expect, therefore, that the origin of the word would also refer to something that causes harm, but that's not the case. Instead, the word poison comes from the Latin root potare, meaning simply to drink. Surprising as this may be, it's not really all that hard to see why. The act of taking a harmful substance most often involves drinking it, usually dissolved in some other liquid, like wine or water. Indeed, the closely related act of taking a substance for genuine medical reasons also got a word of its own from the same root. In this case, potare being transformed to posho and potionis, especially to mean a drink or draught taken for its medicinal or curative properties. Indeed, that's where our modern-day word potion comes from, meaning a drink that is meant to have a special or magical effect on someone or something. Incidentally, the root from potare has also been adopted into the term potable, meaning water which is safe to drink or for use for food preparation. And we also have another related use in pottage, for a category of thick soups or stews in which meat, vegetables, grains, fruit, or a combination of ingredients are boiled together with water, broth, or other liquids. The Latin root potare itself is thought to come from an even earlier Proto-Indo-European word po, meaning to drink, which may even be related to the Sanskrit words pati, drinks, and panam, beverage. This is the case because it's thought that Proto-Indo-European and Sanskrit probably share an even earlier common language. Returning to Latin, we might expect that poison came into English as a consequence of the Roman invasion and occupation of Britain, Latin being their native language. But this isn't so. It had to wait another 600 years until the Norman conquest in 1066. As such, potara first entered Old French and then Norman French as poison, and then eventually became the Old English word poison. Surprisingly, the meaning still didn't refer to a harmful substance, but continued to broadly mean a medicinal drink, and the eventual change to its present definition had to wait until the 14th century, when poison, at last, finally took on its current meaning in both French and English, becoming firmly established as a substance that causes harm or death. And that's been the case ever since. Having said that, whilst the definition in English did eventually arrive at its modern use, there was until fairly recently no standard way of spelling poison. Therefore, until relatively recently, and even as late as the 19th century, we see at least half a dozen different spelling forms, including poison with a Y and poison spelled P-U-I-S-U-N. Now, if you're wondering whether the inhabitants of the British Isles between the Roman and Norman conquests had their own word for a harmful substance, then the word is yes. The word was Ator, sometimes also used as Ator or Ater. Some authorities believe that the word predates the Roman invasion and was used by the original British tribes. Others, however, think that the word came with the Saxon settlers who colonised the British Isles after the Romans had left in the 4th century. However, this is rather doubtful because there is no record of this or similar words ever having been used in the Germanic homelands from when the Saxons came. Instead, the Germanic word for poison is gift, which is rather ironic since it's the same word used for the act of giving something to someone. It's not hard to see how poisoning someone might be seen as the ultimate act of generosity. In reality, whether Ator came with the Saxon or was indigenous in ancient Britain doesn't really matter. That's because its use has now all but died out, except that in a few parts of Yorkshire the word attercop is very occasionally used for spiders, from the combined etter for poison and cop for the head. That's because of the mistaken belief at the time that all spiders are poisonous. In the 16th century, attercop briefly made a wider foray to describe an unfriendly, ill-natured, figuratively poisonous person, before finally dying out. Except that J.R.R. Tolkien, the famous Oxford scholar of Anglo-Saxon history, briefly resurrected it in his fantasy book The Hobbit. Indeed, many claim that he based the book loosely on Anglo-Saxon legends and folklore. In it, the hero of the book, Bilbo, sang the following song when attempting to distract some spiders. Old fat spider spinning in a tree, old fat spider can't see me, attercop, won't you stop your spinning and look for me. Let's now turn to the word venom. Like poison, this too came into English from Latin via Old French and the Norman invasion. This time the original Latin root was venenum, which the Romans in this case literally did use to mean a poison or drug. The French shortened and changed the pronunciation to venim or venin, retaining the original Latin meaning, at least in the early days. As time passed, however, they gradually began to use the word to mean a bitter or virulent feeling or language, not a harmful substance at all. And that's how venom mainly entered the English language. The first written use of the word, which appears in a 14th century manuscript, uses venom to mean malice and spitefulness. Since then, the word has led somewhat of a double life. On the one hand, it has continued to refer to someone's expression of great bitterness, maliciousness and anger towards someone else. But it has also somewhat returned back to its original meaning, but in a very specific context. As currently defined by the Collins Dictionary, it means a poisonous fluid produced by such animals as certain snakes, insects and scorpions, which is injected into another animal by a bite or sting. An organism that delivers its substance in this way is said to be venomous. Interestingly, the closely interwoven linguistic paths followed by the words poison and venom happened only in French and English, undoubtedly because of the closely interwoven histories of these two countries. The other European languages with Latin roots like Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian and Italian went very much their own way. All of them, for example, retained the original Latin root venenum to mean poison, albeit changing the spelling and pronunciation so that today they use veneno in Spanish and Portuguese and veleno in Italian. By retaining venenum from the original Latin, they saw no need to adopt another word, so that none of these languages uses poison from the root potare, as do the French and English. Having said that, whilst potare does not make an appearance in these languages for poison, it does so for potion, so we have poción in Spanish, pozione in Italian, and pocao in Portuguese. It just goes to show how complicated and convoluted the evolution of languages can be. So what about the origins of the Latin venenum itself? Well, just like potare, the word once again seems to go back to the time of Proto-Indo-European. In this case, probably from the word ven or vench, used to refer to desire or the act of striving for something. Often the desire, especially if it was in the form of love, would be sought by means of a charm or a seduction potion. So by logical progression, ven and later venenum would come to mean any substance with medicinal activity, and then eventually to a substance with harmful effects, in other words, a poison. Incidentally, as with the Proto-Indo-European root po, ven also seems to have a relationship with a similar word in Sanskrit, as with vanati, which means gain, wish, or erotic lust. This again suggests that Proto-Indo-European and Sanskrit share an even older common language root. As for the Latin venenum, there is yet another possible origin of the word, coming from the Roman goddess Venus, whom the Romans adopted from the earlier Greek Aphrodite. She was the deity of love, beauty, desire, fertility, prosperity, victory, and seduction. Accordingly, making offerings and praying to her would give love potions their potency, and therefore it's not hard to see how venenum would have jumped from the name of the goddess Venus to denote such concoctions. Once it gained its meaning this way, the derivative word veneficium came to mean the practice of sorcery, while veneficus or venefica were applied to a maker of drugs, depending on their gender. Let's finally look at the definition and origin of the word toxin. If poison is used to describe any substance harmful to a human or another organism, then toxin narrows this down specifically to those substances produced by living organisms. In other words, a poison may be any harmful substance, including man-made chemicals or natural ones in the environment, whereas a toxin is a substance explicitly produced by a living cell or organism. However, it is not usually injected into others like venoms. Examples of toxins include those produced by bacteria, fungi, mollusks and fish, most of which poison other organisms when consumed. Interestingly, there are no known examples of toxins from birds. However, there are a couple of examples, such as the hooded pitahui, where the birds are known to be poisonous to eat. But they do not produce their own toxins. Instead, their bodies accumulate and store toxins from the animals and plants they eat, most often poisonous insects. The Collins Dictionary defines a toxin as any of various poisonous substances produced by a living organism, and the adjective toxic as an effect resulting from, affected with, or caused by a toxin or poison. As for its origin, toxin is probably the most certain of the three. It comes from the ancient Persian root taxa, meaning a bow, as in the weapon. When fighting battles, the Persians were notorious for smearing their arrow tips with poison, thereby making their weapons more effective. Even if they weren't, then they certainly terrified their opponents. Since most of these wars were against the Greeks, it wasn't long before the Greeks began to associate poison with poison arrows, and therefore with archery in general. Accordingly, the Greeks began to call the practice of archery toxikon, whilst the derivative toxon came to denote an arrow. Being fond of epic tales, it wasn't long before the Greeks wove the discovery and use of such weapons into their own mythology. According to such stories, it wasn't the Persians who discovered poisoned arrows, but their own legendary champion Hercules, who slew the monster serpent Hydra and smeared its venom on his arrows, thereby being the first to invent such weapons. Eventually, by the time the word moved from Greek into Latin, now as toxicum, its meaning had completely transformed from archery to literally mean poison. There is an alternative suggestion that toxin comes from the Greek name for the yew tree, taxus. The tree was well known by the ancient Greeks as a source of ingredients for making poison arrows. All parts of the tree, but especially the berries and leaves, are often lethal if eaten. However, the name of the tree itself almost certainly comes from the Persian taxa, which we met earlier, which means that we get into a circular discussion as to the origin of the word. Whatever its origin, the Greek toxikon, followed by the Latin toxicum, subsequently entered Old French as toxique, and thereby in the late 17th century into English as toxin and toxic. Okay, so there you have it, the differences between poison, venom and toxin. Let's recap. The word poison is largely a non-specific generic term used to describe any harmful substance, whether natural or man-made, which causes injury or death of a person or some other life form. In turn, toxin refers to those harmful substances that are produced specifically by living organisms, ranging from bacteria to plants and animals. However, when used as an adjective, toxic changes the meaning to describe any substance that has the effect of being a poison. And finally, venom is a toxic substance exclusively of animal origin that is injected through a bite or sting by one living animal into another. Okay, that's all for this episode. Thank you for watching. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up and use the comments below to say what you think about this channel or what you'd like to see in the future. Next time we'll begin to look in detail at what poisonous substances are and how they work. Meanwhile, please don't forget to subscribe and please click on the notification bell to make sure you don't miss future episodes. Bye for now and see you next time.